To be utterly ruined in front of 400 of London's elite is a social death sentence. But when the Duke of Rothbury publicly humiliated Lady Vivian Carmichael, casting her aside for a wealthier heiress, he didn't destroy her. He unknowingly handed her the crown of an empire. In the private, dust-covered archives of the Carmichael estate in Somerset, there exists a fragile, ribbon-bound stack of letters dated the spring of 1814. They are penned in the sharp, elegant hand of Arthur Pendleton, the 9th Duke of Rothbury. The ink has faded to a rust brown, but the promises within remain as stark and damning as the day they were written. "You are the only jewel I wish to wear at my side, my dearest Vivian," reads one dispatch sent just days before the infamous mid-season ball at Almack's. "When the violins strike up the midnight waltz on Tuesday, wait for me. I shall make my intentions known to all of London." Lady Vivian Carmichael was 19, possessed of a sharp wit, raven-dark hair, and the kind of luminous, untainted optimism that only a sheltered upbringing can produce. She was the only daughter of Viscount Carmichael, a man of impeccable lineage, but dwindling fortunes. Her dowry was modest, a fact that had terrified her mother Beatrice. But Vivian had believed herself safe. She had secured the affections of the season's greatest prize. For 3 months, Arthur had courted her in the shadows of the Ton's strict rules, stolen kisses in the maze at Hampton Court, lingering touches during the quadrille, and whispered vows in the corners of crowded ballrooms. The night of the Almack's assembly was suffocatingly warm. The air was thick with the scent of beeswax candles, crushed lilies, and the nervous perspiration of ambitious mothers. Vivian stood near the colossal marble pillars, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wore a gown of pale ivory silk, deliberately simple, wanting nothing to distract from the moment Arthur would cross the room to claim her hand for the supper dance, the universal unspoken declaration of an impending betrothal. At 1:15, the heavy double doors swung open. The room hushed as the Duke of Rothbury entered. Arthur was undeniably striking, tall, broad-shouldered, with calculating ice-blue eyes and a jawline that suggested unyielding authority. Vivian stepped forward, a soft, expectant smile gracing her lips. Her eyes met his across the sea of satin and lace. He looked at her, and then he looked right through her. Without a flicker of hesitation, Arthur turned his back on the Viscount's daughter. He cut a deliberate path across the polished floor, stopping before the imposing figure of Lord Harrington, a notoriously ruthless industrialist who had recently bought his way into the peerage. Beside Lord Harrington stood his daughter, Lady Cecily, a woman draped in an ostentatious display of rubies, her smile as sharp as shattered glass. Cecily's dowry was rumoured to be £50,000 enough to repair the leaking roofs of all 3 of Arthur's country estates. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a silence so profound that the rustle of Arthur taking Cecily's gloved hand sounded like a gunshot. "Lady Cecily." Arthur's voice boomed, clear and steady, carrying easily to where Vivian stood frozen. "May I have the honour of this waltz and the supper to follow?" A collective gasp swept through the Patroness's enclosure. Lady Jersey nudged Princess Leven, their eyes darting hungrily toward Vivian. Vivian could not breathe. The walls of the assembly room seemed to warp and tilt. Driven by a desperate, panicked disbelief, she did something entirely unpardonable. In polite society, she followed them. As Arthur led Cecily toward the open French doors of the terrace for a breath of air before the music began, Vivian stepped into their path. "Arthur," she whispered, her voice trembling, "my lord, I do not understand. The letter. You said tonight." Arthur stopped. Cecily's manicured hand tightened on his arm, a patronizing smirk playing on her painted lips. Arthur's face hardened into a mask of pure aristocratic disdain. He looked at Vivian not as a lover, but as a nuisance. "Lady Vivian," he said, his tone dripping with a cold condescension that cut deeper than a knife. "I believe you have misconstrued common courtesy for something entirely more absurd. You are the daughter of a viscount whose estate is mortgaged to the hilt. I am a duke with a legacy to secure. I need a duchess, not a charitable cause." He raised his voice just a fraction, ensuring the eavesdropping aristocrats hovering near the glass doors caught every word. "Do not embarrass yourself or your family any further. Return to your mother." He brushed past her, leaving her standing alone in the biting night air. The destruction of Vivian Carmichael was instantaneous. As she fled through the ballroom, the whispers rose into a deafening crescendo. Delusional, desperate, ruined. Her mother Beatrice swayed and collapsed into a swoon, while her father stood red-faced and paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of the insult. By dawn, there was not a household in Mayfair that did not know the Viscount's daughter had thrown herself at the Duke and been brutally, publicly swatted away like a common fly. For 4 agonizing weeks, the Mayfair townhouse of the Carmichael family felt like a tomb. The heavy velvet curtains were drawn tight against the relentless London rain. Invitations which had once arrived in silver trays, stacked high, ceased entirely. When Vivian's father attempted to enter his gentleman's club in St. James's, he was met with polite, agonizingly cool nods and turned backs. The scandal had branded them as social pariahs. In the beginning, Vivian wept until her eyes were swollen shut. She read Arthur's letters obsessively, searching for the lie she had missed, the warning sign she had ignored. But as the days dragged on, the crushing weight of her humiliation began to compress the soft, naive girl she had been into something entirely different. The tears dried up, leaving behind a hard, crystalline clarity. She realized that in a world governed by wealth and title, emotion was a weakness, and vulnerability was an invitation to be slaughtered. She gathered Arthur's letters, marched down to the parlor, and threw them into the hearth, watching the flames consume the false promises. When she turned around, her posture was ramrod straight. "We are going out," she announced to her bewildered mother. "If we hide, we admit defeat. We will attend the Royal Horticultural Society's botanical exhibition at Kew Gardens tomorrow." "Vivian, you cannot be serious," her mother gasped, clutching her shawl. "The ton will tear you to ribbons. Cecily Harrington and the Duke are expected to attend." "Let them," Vivian said, her voice devoid of its former sweetness. "I will not be a prisoner in my own life because a coward decided to buy his bride." The exhibition at Kew Gardens was a crowded, humid affair under the vast glass domes of the conservatory. The moment Vivian stepped through the wrought-iron doors, the atmosphere shifted. Parasols dipped to conceal whispers. Ladies turned their backs. Arthur and Cecily were indeed there, holding court near a display of rare ferns. Arthur caught her eye from across the pathway and offered a smirk of mocking pity. Instead of wilting, Vivian lifted her chin, turned on her heel, and walked purposefully into the dense, unoccupied rear section of the glass house, where the air was stifling and the foliage grew wild and unpruned. She needed a moment to breathe, to steady the furious shaking in her hands. She stopped before a massive, aggressive-looking orchid with deep purple petals that seemed to devour the wood it was attached to. "Fascinating, isn't it?" a voice murmured from the shadows. Vivian startled. A man was standing a few feet away, partially obscured by the broad leaves of a banana tree. He wore a simple, impeccably tailored dark coat, bereft of the usual ostentatious cravats and jewels favored by the dandies of the season. His features were sharp, his eyes a piercing, intelligent hazel. There was an air of absolute stillness about him, a quiet authority that required no announcement. "I find it rather parasitic, actually," Vivienne replied, her defences immediately flaring. She had no patience left for the men of society. "It clings to a stronger host, suffocating it merely to display its own brief, colourful vanity. Much like the people in the other room." The man stepped into the light, raising an eyebrow. A slow, genuine smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "A harsh assessment of London's finest, my lady." "A truthful one, sir," Vivienne shot back, "though I suppose truth is entirely out of fashion this season. We are expected to admire the parasites and applaud their ability to drain the life from anything genuine." The stranger laughed, a rich, deep sound that startled a flock of exotic birds above them. "You have a dangerous tongue. Most women of your station speak only in compliments and practiced modesty." "Most women of my station have something left to lose," Vivienne said, her gaze locking with his. "I do not. Now, if you will excuse me, I must return to the firing line before my mother assumes I have drowned myself in the lily pond." She swept past him, entirely unaware that the man she had just thoroughly dressed down was Prince Leopold of House Hanover, the reclusive crown prince of the realm who had recently returned from military campaigns on the continent. Leopold had come to the gardens in disguise, desperately seeking an hour of peace away from the fawning sycophants of the court. Instead, he had found a woman whose fire and sheer unvarnished honesty eclipsed every painted debutante he had ever met. He watched her retreat, his hazel eyes narrowing with intense, calculating interest. 2 weeks later, the social season reached its zenith, the Queen's Summer Gala at St. James's Palace. It was an event so exclusive that fortunes were spent merely attempting to secure an invitation. The Carmichaels had received theirs via a royal courier, a thick parchment stamped with the prince's personal crest. Her father had wept with relief. Vivienne had simply stared at it, her mind whirring. The ballroom of St. James's was a blinding spectacle of gold-leaf crystal chandeliers and diamond tiaras. When Vivienne entered, wearing a breathtaking gown of midnight blue velvet that made her look like a piece of the night sky, the room fell into a tense, buzzing hush. Arthur, standing near the royal dais with Cecily clinging to his arm, frowned. He stepped into Vivienne's path as she made her way toward the refreshment tables. "I am surprised the guards let you past the gates." "Vivienne," Arthur sneered quietly, his voice carrying only to those immediately around them. "It takes a remarkable lack of shame to show your face here. Are you hoping to throw yourself at a visiting baron tonight?" Before Vivienne could unleash the sharp retort resting on her tongue, the heavy brass trumpets sounded from the upper balcony. The master of ceremonies struck his staff against the marble floor. "His Royal Highness Prince Leopold, Crown Prince of the realm." The sea of aristocrats parted instantly, sinking into deep sweeping bows and curtsies. Leopold descended the grand staircase. He was resplendent in his dark military dress uniform, adorned with the sash of the garter. The room held its collective breath as the future king walked through the crowd. He bypassed the foreign dignitaries. He ignored the frantic, hopeful smiles of the patronesses. He walked directly toward the Duke of Rothbury. Arthur puffed out his chest, stepping forward to offer a deep, self-important bow, pulling Cecily down with him. "Your Royal Highness, it is an honor." Leopold did not even look at the Duke. He stepped neatly around Arthur's bowed form, stopping squarely in front of Vivienne. The prince offered a brilliant, devastating smile, his hazel eyes flashing with shared secrets. He extended his white-gloved hand toward her. "You promised me a waltz, Lady Vivienne," Leopold said, his voice echoing perfectly through the dead-silent ballroom. and I believe I am ready to brave the firing line if you are." The sprawling ballroom of St. James's Palace collectively held its breath, as Prince Leopold's impeccably white-gloved hand remained extended toward Lady Vivian Carmichael. The deafening heavy silence stretched until it felt as though the very air might shatter into a million jagged pieces. The powerful aristocracy of London, so comfortably accustomed to carelessly dictating the social fates of the vulnerable, stood completely paralyzed by the sudden, shocking intervention of supreme, unquestionable authority. Vivian stared blankly at his offered hand, her mind racing frantically back to the humid, secluded shadows of the botanical glasshouse just weeks prior. The mysterious, quiet stranger who had intently listened to her venomous, entirely unvarnished critique of high society was not just a passing eccentric nobleman. He was the Crown Prince. A sudden thrill of pure, unadulterated vindication, incredibly sharp and impossibly sweet, pierced right through the lingering, painful remnants of her public humiliation. Deliberately showing absolutely no fear to the watching crowds, she confidently placed her trembling hand into his. His grip was exceptionally firm and warm, instantly grounding her as he respectfully led her toward the absolute center of the vast, heavily polished marble floor. The palace orchestra, violently jolted from their collective paralysis by a sharp, furious warning glare from the panicked master of ceremonies, frantically struck up a sweeping, magnificent Viennese waltz as Leopold pulled her seamlessly into the elegant frame of the intricate dance. The dense sea of gawking aristocrats was forced to physically fall back. Their heavy silk gowns and meticulously tailored velvet coattails rustled loudly as they hastily gave the royal couple the entirety of the grand exhibition space. "You thoroughly deceived me, Your Highness," Vivian murmured softly, keeping her dark gaze strictly fixed on the intricate, heavy gold braiding of his military uniform as they began to sweep across the magnificent floor. "I merely omitted a formal title, Lady Vivian," Leopold corrected smoothly, his bright hazel eyes gleaming with undeniable wicked amusement. "Had I formally introduced myself as the Crown Prince among the damp ferns, you would have predictably offered me the same breathless, entirely empty flattery as every other aggressively ambitious woman in London. I much preferred the fierce, beautiful critic who boldly dared to compare my esteemed, powerful peers to parasitic, blood-sucking orchids. And now you are very publicly parading me before those very same parasites," she countered intelligently, finally lifting her dark eyes to meet his piercing, intense gaze. "Do you truly realize what you have carelessly done? By tomorrow morning, the vicious gossip will consume my family entirely. I am already a known social scandal. You will undeniably make me a massive public spectacle." "Let them gossip until their throats are completely raw," Leopold said firmly, his voice dropping to a low, incredibly intimate timbre that sent a sudden electric shiver down her spine. "They happily gossiped when you were cruelly wronged by a pathetic coward who drastically lacked the spine to recognize your true, immense worth. Now they will enviously whisper that you have successfully captured the full, completely undivided attention of the absolute crown. I fully intend to entirely rewrite the tragic narrative of your life, Vivian. That is, if you will kindly permit me the profound honor." Vivian's breath caught sharply in her throat. They spun gracefully past the glittering periphery of the captivated crowd, and she caught a fleeting, highly satisfying glimpse of the Duke of Rothbury. Arthur's handsome face was the exact, sickly color of old parchment, his strong jaw slack with profound, unhidden disbelief, while Lady Cecily looked as though she had violently swallowed a mouthful of sour lemons. The sheer, intoxicating power of that single beautiful image acted like a soothing, magical balm on Vivian's bruised, battered pride. Over the following 6 glorious weeks, the notoriously rigid social hierarchy of London underwent a violent, unprecedented tectonic shift that left the powerful patronesses completely reeling. The Crown Prince's public favour was a social currency infinitely more valuable than Arthur's ancient crumbling dukedom or Lord Harrington's staggering newly minted industrial wealth. Leopold quickly became a constant, powerfully looming fixture at the modest Carmichael townhouse. He sent incredibly rare exotic blooms from the strictly private royal greenhouses every single morning, eagerly accompanied her on long, highly visible afternoon rides through Hyde Park on a magnificent silver-maned Andalusian mare he had explicitly gifted her, and sat intimately by her side in the velvet-draped royal box at the opera, entirely ignoring the tragic singers on stage. The ton, ever incredibly fickle and utterly desperate for any royal proximity, immediately suffered a severe, convenient case of collective amnesia regarding Vivian's prior brutal humiliation. Heavy, gold-embossed invitations poured into the Carmichael estate by the hundreds. Her father's aggressive, threatening creditors miraculously vanished overnight, their massive, terrifying debts quietly and permanently absorbed by supposedly anonymous royal benefactors. Arthur, meanwhile, found himself standing utterly discarded in the cold, unforgiving shadow of Vivian's blinding meteoric ascent. His highly publicized, incredibly expensive engagement to Cecily, once loudly hailed as the absolute triumph of the social season, now felt dreadfully pedestrian and incredibly cheap. Worse, the vicious, barely whispered comparisons began to echo loudly through the exclusive gentlemen's clubs of St. James. Why had the arrogant Duke foolishly discarded a magnificent woman, now deemed spectacularly worthy of a future king? Was the Duke severely lacking in basic fundamental judgment? Was his desperate, obvious need for Harrington's common industrial money a glaring neon sign of his own family's impending catastrophic financial ruin, driven by a highly toxic combustible cocktail of severely bruised aristocratic ego and mounting, suffocating panic? Arthur aggressively orchestrated a dangerous moment to corner Vivian during a lavish, chaotic masquerade ball hosted by the wealthy Duchess of Devonshire. Leopold had momentarily stepped away to confer urgently with a visiting French ambassador, leaving Vivian entirely alone on a shadowy, secluded stone balcony beautifully overlooking the vast moonlit hedge mazes. "It is a highly dangerous, foolish game you are playing, Vivian," Arthur hissed maliciously, stepping aggressively out from behind a carved stone urn. His black velvet domino mask was pushed haphazardly up onto his forehead, revealing a flushed, desperately angry face. "Do not for a single second think you can casually parade the Crown Prince in front of me, merely to induce my petty jealousy. It is entirely pathetic, and it will undeniably end in your utter, permanent destruction." Vivian turned slowly, her voluminous midnight blue silk skirts rustling heavily and elegantly against the cold stone floor. She looked intently at the tall man who had once systematically broken her trusting heart, searching deeply for the godlike, infallible, perfect figure she had foolishly worshipped. She found absolutely nothing of the sort. She saw only a desperate, deeply flawed, thoroughly ordinary man, absolutely reeking of cheap brandy and profound, suffocating regret. "You flatter yourself to a truly absurd degree, Your Grace," she replied calmly, her voice as cool, perfectly smooth and unyielding as river glass. "I can assure you with absolute certainty I do not think of you at all." Arthur stepped aggressively closer, his innate, highly toxic arrogance hopelessly trying to completely mask his overwhelming, pathetic desperation. "Leopold is merely playing with you, you naive, foolish girl. Royals absolutely do not ever marry penniless, insignificant viscounts' daughters. He will selfishly use you for the thrilling entertainment of the season and brutally discard you the exact moment his royal family demands a strategic political alliance. Cecily's massive guaranteed dowry firmly secures my family's aristocratic future for a full century. What does the prince actually offer you, besides temporary, fleeting public spectacle? Come back to me immediately. Break this absurd charade off. Be my hidden mistress. I will personally ensure you are kept in absolute unmatched secret luxury for the rest of your days. The sheer breathtaking audacity of the repulsive, insulting proposition hung heavily in the damp, cool night air. A mere month ago, Vivian might have wept bitterly from the devastating insult. Today she laughed a sharp, genuinely amused, piercing sound that cut violently through Arthur's fragile, crumbling pride like a sharpened steel scythe. "You are a monumental, spectacular fool, Arthur," she said firmly, stepping boldly toward him, her dark gaze completely unwavering and terrifyingly clear. "You gleefully sold your ancient honor and your family name to the absolute highest bidder. And now you stand pathetically before me, trembling in the dark, begging desperately for scraps. Return to your legally purchased heiress, and pray you never ever cross my path again." She swept past him without a single backward glance, completely leaving the supposedly mighty powerful Duke of Rothbury to rage silently and helplessly in the cold dark. The devastating twist that broke the Duke of Rothbury arrived with a heavily armed squadron of the Royal Dragoons tearing through the quiet countryside. Autumn had just begun to turn the leaves of Hyde Park gold when the catastrophic news broke across London like a thunderclap. Lord Harrington Cecily's powerful father was arrested at his country estate on severe charges of high treason, fraud, and embezzlement. For over a decade, Harrington had been ruthlessly skimming fortunes from vital military contracts, supplying the King's army with rotting rations and defective munitions during the wars. The investigation had been spearheaded by Prince Leopold himself, acting on alarming discrepancies he noted commanding troops. The financial fallout was swift and absolute. The furious Crown immediately seized all of Lord Harrington's extensive assets, freezing his bank accounts and confiscating his properties. The £50,000 dowry that Arthur had sacrificed his honor to secure vanished into the royal treasury overnight. Arthur was legally trapped. The binding betrothal contracts had been witnessed by the powerful Archbishop. To break the engagement now, when Harrington was ruined and facing the gallows, would destroy the last shred of the Duke's fragile standing in the House of Lords. He was irrevocably bound to marry the penniless daughter of a convicted traitor. The Rothbury estates, already crumbling dangerously under debts, were doomed to immediate foreclosure. The Duke had traded his soul for a heavy chest of gold, only to pry it open and find it filled with blowing ashes. As Arthur's carefully constructed empire crumbled, Vivienne's star reached its zenith. The prince's publicized courtship had transformed from an act of defiant public support into a romantic partnership. Leopold valued her sharp intellect, frequently consulting her on complex matters of domestic policy, and relying on her unvarnished perspective to cut through the sycophancy of his royal advisers. They were equals in spirit, forging an unbreakable bond built on the bedrock of mutual respect, shared vision, and passion. The culmination of the season was the Autumn Gala, a majestic affair held in the staterooms of Buckingham House. The atmosphere was electric, buzzing with the shocking downfall of the Harrington Empire and the rise of the Carmichael family. Arthur attended the lavish gala standing alone. Cecily had been banished to a cottage in the north, and Arthur looked every inch the defeated man. His immaculate cravat was frayed, his broad shoulders bowed beneath the weight of his financial ruin. He stood near the towering marble pillars where he had once humiliated Vivian, clutching a glass of flat champagne, watching the glittering room. Suddenly, the palace orchestra ceased playing mid-measure. The low hum of aristocratic conversation evaporated as Prince Leopold stepped confidently onto the raised dais at the head of the colossal ballroom. He wore the ceremonial uniform of the Royal Guard, the brilliant red fabric adorned with a staggering array of military medals. He looked out over the sea of the most powerful people in Britain, and then his gaze softened as he looked directly at Vivian. "My lords, ladies, and esteemed guests." Leopold's voice resonated through the cavernous hall. "Tonight we gather to celebrate the continued prosperity of our great nation. But for me, the future lies not in political treaties, but in the heart of the woman who has shown me the true meaning of courage." Leopold descended the steps, walking with deliberate strides until he reached Vivian. The crowd parted immediately. Arthur watched from the shadows, his knuckles turning white as he gripped his glass. Leopold stopped before Vivian, and to the astonishment of 400 seasoned aristocrats, the future king of the realm dropped to one knee. Sharp gasps echoed off the frescoed ceiling. Ladies clutched their pearls, unable to process the magnitude of the moment. "Lady Vivian Carmichael," Leopold said, "you possess a spirit that cannot be bought, a dignity that refuses to be broken, and a heart I am desperate to win. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, my equal partner, and the future queen of this realm?" Tears pricked Vivian's eyes. She looked down at the man who had recognized her true worth. She looked past him, catching the eye of the Duke one final time. Arthur was staring at her, ruined and fading into obscurity. Vivian turned her gaze back to her prince. She offered him a smile. "Yes, your Royal Highness," she said, her voice clear. "It would be my honor." Leopold rose, taking her hand and sliding a sapphire ring onto her finger. As he pulled her into a kiss, the ballroom erupted into applause. Vivian had lost a duke, but as she stood beside the man she loved, she knew the truth. She had never been cast aside. She had finally been set free to rule an empire. What a breathtaking journey of betrayal, revenge, and ultimate triumph. Lady Vivian proved that the greatest revenge against those who try to destroy your worth is simply rising above them and claiming the crown you truly deserve. If you loved this incredible tale of historical drama, royal romance, and scandalous twists, please hit that like button right now. Share this story with your fellow romance lovers, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more epic, unforgettable historical dramas.